Hey folks, in this episode we're going to be covering motion graphics to make this title sequence for a non-fiction TV drama. It's going to be a relatively straightforward tutorial. You'll learn a few tricks and tips along the way, so without further ado, let's get to it. Open up Blender, we're going to go to Edit, Preferences, and go to Add-ons, and search for Node, and then enable the Node Wrangler here. Once you've enabled that, click this button and click Save Preferences, and that will ensure the Node Wrangler loads every time you load Blender. I'll just close this window here. I'm going to navigate to my render tab over here, and I'm going to change it from Eevee to Cycles. You can use Eevee if you like, it should work absolutely fine. I'm also going to change my device type to GPU. Next up, I'm going to navigate to this website here, displacementx.pages.dev, and that should bring up this user interface here. I'll leave a link in the description for this website. So the first thing I'll do is I'll scroll down until I see resolution. I'm going to change my resolution to 8K. I'll then scroll up to the top, and under settings where it says basic, I'm going to turn the iterations all the way up to 2000, and maybe I'm going to increase the background brightness to, let's say, around about 64. I'll disable rectangles, I'll disable grid, I'll disable columns, disable rows and disable lines, and I'll enable the sprites. I'll activate all the sprite packs, so that's Big Data, Aggro Max and Crap Pack. I'll then scroll to the top until I see this render tab here. I'll click render. Once you've clicked the render button, you should have a displacement map like this. So the idea here is to generate a displacement map where the center is completely blank. So the center should be grey with no detail in the middle, and that's so we can add our text into the middle of this. Therefore, I'm going to keep clicking render until I've got a suitable displacement map. So I'm just going to keep clicking this until I've got something suitable. Okay, this is pretty good. We've got a blank space in the middle. I'll just download this one. This displacement map would work fine, but I'm not entirely happy with the result, so I'm going to keep scanning until I've got something that I like. Okay, I quite like this result, so I should be able to fit a word in here. Maybe I can find something a bit better. I'll just click download, just to keep it as an option. I'll keep clicking render. Okay. I really like this displacement map, but I'd have to rotate it by 90 degrees because the text won't fit horizontally here. It would fit going this way. So I'm going to click download. I'm just going to generate a few more to see if there's anything better. I really like this one. I think the text will fit nicely in this space here. So I'll click download. That'll do for now. So I'm going to collapse this window here. I'm back into Blender. We just need to import those images into Blender. So I'm going to take this default cube. I'm going to hit delete. I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go Mesh, and I'm going to add a plane into the scene. I'll then hit RX90, and that will rotate it on the X-axis by 90 degrees. I hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll hit numpad period to zoom into the selected object. So I'm going to take my cursor to the bottom left of the 3D viewport until I see a crosshair. I'll left click and drag up and open up a new window. I'll then change this from the 3D viewport to the shader editor. So now, if I go to my material tab over here and click this button, you should have a default material in Blender. If you don't, just click new. So I'll select that default material. In my shader editor, I'm going to hit N to hide the N panel. I'm going to zoom into these nodes, and with the principal BSDF selected, I'm going to hit Ctrl T, and that will add a texture coordinate, a mapping and an image texture node. I'll then click Open, navigate to where you saved your displacement maps, select the displacement map and click Open Image, and on this image texture node we're going to change the color space from sRGB to non-color data. From here I'm going to go to viewport shading. I'll disconnect the displacement map from the principal BSDF and I'll increase the roughness to 1. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to vector and I'm going to choose displacement, and I'll pop that down here. I'll plug the color from the displacement map into the height of the displacement node. I'll then connect this displacement socket into the displacement socket of the material output. At the moment, it's only showing bump, but we'll fix that in a minute. So with this plane object selected, I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to right click and I'll choose subdivide. I'll then take my cursor to the bottom left of the 3D viewport and expand the subdivide menu down here. I'm going to change the number of cuts to, let's say, 32. I'll then collapse these options here. I'll tab out of edit mode, and under your modifier tab over here, I'm going to click Add Modifier, we'll go to Generate, and I'm going to choose Subdivision Surface. For the render, I'm going to set this to 5, maybe 6. I'll just set it to 5 for now. And for the viewport levels, I'm going to set to 3. To change this into displacement, we'll have to navigate to the Material tab over here. We'll scroll down until we see this Settings tab. Expand these settings, scroll down, and where it says displacement, we're going to change the displacement type from bump only to displacement only. Now if I go to my shader editor and increase the scale on my displacement node, we should see displacement. Excellent. I'm going to set this to, let's say, 0.1. That should do for now. I'll now navigate to my outliner and I'm going to rename this object to displacement plane. I'll also rename the material to displacement material. I'll navigate to my outliner up here. I'll click this button and I'll enable all the filters. I'll then click this eye icon and hide the displacement plane from the 3D viewport. So now we need to add a text object, but we're going to be doing this with geometry nodes. So I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go mesh and I'm going to choose cube. Let's give this cube a material. So I'm going to click new and I'll rename the material to text material. I'll then navigate over to the left, click this button here, and I'll change it from the shader editor to the geometry node editor. I'll then click new, and I'll rename the geometry nodes to text GN for text geometry nodes. I'm going to delete the group input. If you've never made text in geometry nodes, it's really easy. All we have to do is hit Shift A and search for string to curves. We'll then connect the curve instances socket into the geometry socket of the group output. And our text goes in this box where it says string. So in this box, I'm going to type in industrial in capital letters. I'll then change the alignment from left to center. And I'll change the baseline from top to middle. Here we can adjust the scale and character spacing. At current, this wouldn't render because the outline are just curves. So in order to fix that, we just hit Shift A and search for fill curve. And we'll pop that in between the string to curve and the group output. Now we need to give it some thickness. That's easy enough. We just hit Shift A and search for extrude and choose extrude mesh. And we'll pop that in between the fill curves and the group output. At current, that extrusion value is way too high. So I'm going to set this to, let's say, 0.25. Okay, that's looking a lot better. Now we do have a problem with this. So I'm just going to go into solid view. I'm going to click this button here and I'll enable the face orientation filters. And if I scroll underneath, you can see that these faces are red and they shouldn't be. So that means that the normals are pointing the wrong direction. So to fix that, we need to flip the direction of the normals on this original output here before the extrusion. In the geometry node window, I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to search for flip faces and we'll choose this node here, flip faces. So now if I was to connect this fill curve to this flip faces mesh and then plug this into the geometry, you can see that the faces have flipped. So now all we need to do is join these two together. So I'll hit Shift A and I'm going to search for join and we'll choose join geometry. And I'll pop that in there. I'll then plug the flip faces into the top socket. So now if I look underneath, you can see that all the normals are pointing outward. Excellent. I'll just navigate to my filters over here and I'm going to disable face orientation. I'm not over keen on the font style. So on my string to curves node, I'm going to click this button here and that should take you to your fonts. I want a bold looking font, so I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to choose Arial Black. I'll then click Open Font. I'll just increase the geometry node window. I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. Now I want to create a system where these characters are flickering, and we can achieve that with a delete geometry node. So I'm going to box select these two nodes here. I'm going to hit G, bring them across over to here. I'll then hit Shift A and I'm going to search for delete geometry. And I'll pop that in between there. I'll also plug this socket from the delete geometry into the mesh socket of the flip faces. We're going to change this from points to instances because each of the characters are instances. I'll then hit Shift A and I'm going to search for random and we'll choose random value. I'll pop that down here. We're going to change it from float to boolean. I'll then plug the value from the random value node into the selection of the delete geometry node. The way this works is the probability slider will increase or decrease the likelihood of each character being deleted. So for now, I'm going to turn the probability to 0. We'll keyframe this a bit later on. I'll then take my cursor to the top right hand corner of the geometry node editor window until I see a crosshair. I'll left click and drag across and open up a new window. I'll change this window from the geometry node editor to the shader editor. So for now, I'm just going to give a base color of, let's say, blue, and I'll increase the roughness to 1. I'm going to go into viewport shading up here. We won't see the material appear on here because we need to tell geometry nodes that we're using this material. So I'm going to increase this window slightly. And at the end of your geometry node tree, just bring this across, hit Shift A and search for set, and we'll choose set material and we'll pop that in there. We'll then click this box here and we'll choose that text material. I want this material to be split into two components. So I want the upward faces to be black and I want the side faces to have an emissive value. Now luckily for us, we've got this extrude mesh which gives us the top values and the side values. So we need to store an attribute that gives us this side value, which we can then use as a mask to drive the emission in our shader editor. That's easy enough. So in my geometry nodes window, I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to search for store, and we'll choose store named attribute, and I'll pop that in between the join geometry and the set material node. I'll change it from float to color, and I'll change it from point to face, and the attribute we want to capture will be this side value here. So I'll plug this into the value socket of the store named attribute. We now need to give that attribute a name, so I'm going to call mine side. I'll then navigate to my shader editor over here. I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to search for attribute, and I'll select the attribute node and put it here. I'll then call that attribute up by typing in side, and now I can take this factor and plug it into the strength socket of the emission on my principal BSDF, and now as you can see we've got the emission coming through on the side faces. Excellent. So I'm going to take my base color and I'm going to turn this to black. By default white is equal to 1, which gives us a strength of 1, but I want to increase the strength value to 5. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go converter, and we'll choose math, and I'll pop that in between the factor and the strength sockets. I'll then change it from add to multiply, and I'll increase the value to 5. I'll navigate to my outliner and I'll unhide the displacement plane, and with your text object selected I'm going to hit RX90 and then hit enter, and maybe I'll go to my outliner and I'll rename that object to GN text. I'll then hit numpad 1, numpad period, and I'll zoom in. I'll then hit S to scale down. I'm going to hold down control to snap it in increments. That will do for now, and I'll do it one more time. S, hold down control, hold down shift, snap it in place, and I'll take it down to around about there perhaps. I'll then select the displacement plane. I'll then hit G, and I'll just shimmy this plane until I've got the text in the center of the blank space. Maybe something around there perhaps. I'll then orbit round using my middle mouse button. G for grab, Y to grab it on the Y axis, hold down shift to grab it in finer increments, and I'm just going to pull it forward until there's a slight intersection on the text. Okay, I'm going to hit numpad 1, numpad period. In fact, I'll select the geometry node text and hit numpad period, and that will center the view to the selected object. I'll then hit control alt numpad 0, and that will align the camera to the 3D viewport. I'm going to select my camera in the outliner. I'm going to go to my object data over here. I'm going to change the X location to 0 and the Z location to 0. I'll then navigate to my camera data tab down here, and I'm going to change the focal length to, let's say, 24mm. I'll then navigate to the object data tab over here, and I'll decrease the Y value location to, let's say, something around there perhaps. I'm going with minus 0.9. I'm going to orbit into my 3D viewport. I'm going to select my default lamp. I'm going to hit delete. I'll then navigate to the world tab over here, and I'm going to set a strength of 0. So I don't want any ambient light coming from the world. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view, and I'll just pop into rendered view just to see what we've got. Okay, that's looking quite good. I'll just navigate to my output tab over here, and I'm going to enable render region. That will ensure only the camera is rendered in the viewport. While I'm here, I'm going to change the frame rate to 30 frames per second. For a movie or film, you're probably better off going with 24 to 25 frames per second, but because I'm uploading to YouTube, I'm going to go with 30 FPS. Okay, now I think we should add an area light into the scene. So I'm just going to go into viewport shading over here. I'm going to hit Shift C just to ensure that my cursor is center to the world. I'll then hit Shift A, go to light, and we'll choose area. I'll just hit numpad 3 to go into side view. I'll hit G, hold down control to snap the light into increments, and I'm just going to bring it up to, let's say, round about there. I'll then hit R, hold down control to snap it in increments, and I'm going to rotate it to, let's say, round about there. I'm going to go to my light data tab over here, and under your light data settings we're going to change it from square to rectangle. I'll increase the size on the X value to, let's say, 3 meters, and I'll decrease the size on the Y value to, let's say, 0.1. I'll just hit numpad 0. I'm going to go into rendered view. I'll then navigate to the GN text object. I'm going to mute that. I'll then navigate to the area light settings, and I'll increase the power to, let's say, 100. I'll enable temperature. I'll then change the temperature to 6400 Kelvin. I want to match the color temperature from this area light to the same color temperature as the emission value on my geometry node text object. So I'm going to enable my geometry node text object. I'll select that text object, and in the shader editor I'll hit Shift A, and I'm going to search for black body, and I'll enable the black body there. I'll then change the color temperature to 6400 Kelvin, and I'll plug the color into the color of the emission. So now the color of the emission from this text object should match the color of the emission from your area light. Excellent. I'll navigate to the top right of my 3D viewport and I'll click this button here to go into viewport shading. I'll then click this arrow here and I'm going to enable scene light and scene world. Before we continue, it's a good idea to save your project. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save my project as Like and Subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. And then click Save As. So the next thing we'll do is I think we'll tackle the flickering of the area light. So I'm going to go to my shader editor down here. I'm going to change it from shader editor to graph editor. I'll increase this window. And with your area light selected, we're going to go to your light data tab over here. I'm going to set the power to 0. I'll then add a keyframe here. We'll navigate to the graph editor, expand the area light options and select the power option here. That's the keyframe that we just added. We'll then navigate to the graph editor modifiers tab over here. Click add modifier and we're going to choose noise. I'm going to set the scale to 15. I'm going to set the strength to -25. We'll scroll down until it says restrict frame range. We'll enable restrict frame range, expand these options. I'm going to change my timeline to, let's say, 180 frames. And for the start frame, we're going to start on frame 1. We're going to end on frame 180. I want to blend in over 15 frames and blend out over 15 frames. So now, if I hit play, you should see that the light is flickering. Maybe I can change the offset to, let's say, 1000. I'm just going to go to the highest peak, which is here, and I don't think that the area light is bright enough, so I'm going to take the strength down to, let's say, -50, maybe -100. Maybe we can even bump it up a bit more, so -200. Yep, that's plenty bright enough. Excellent. Now in the graph editor, where we've got this noise pattern, I'm going to hold down Control, hold down my middle mouse button, and I'm going to drag down, and that's just so we can fit it in the window. Excellent. Maybe I'll increase this window, because we're going to add some more modifiers here. I'll just go to viewport shading, so we've got a real-time view. Now with the lights flickering, we don't want them to gradually come on and off. We want them to cut in and out. So I'll click add modifier and I'm going to choose stepped interpolation. I'll just scroll down. I'll then increase the step size to, let's say, 5. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. Again, I'm going to use restrict frame range. I'll expand these options. I'll scroll down and we'll start on frame 1. We'll end on frame 180 and we'll blend in over 15 frames and blend out over 15 frames. Now we don't want this light to go into negative values, say like down here for example, and the reason for that is because if we've got other sources of light in our scene, like the emission value from the text, it's going to subtract that light by this value and it will lead to strange artifacts. So we need to limit this noise pattern. So I'm going to go to my modifiers. I'll just collapse the stepped interpolation and I'll collapse the noise pattern. I'll then click add modifier and we go to limits. So under the limits modifier, we're going to enable the Y minimum. I'll also enable the Y maximum. I'll then drag this value up until everything is unclipped. Maybe I'll clip it to, let's say, around about there. I'm just going to skip back to frame 1. I'm going to hit play. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to take my cursor to the top right of my 3D viewport, to my render options up here, and I'm going to click this button and I'm going to disable scene world, and that's just so we can see what's going on in our scene. I'll then select the industrial text object. I'll then ensure I'm on frame 1 on my timeline. I'll just rotate this round. I'll then hit G, Y, hold down shift, and I'm just going to drag this text object back behind the displacement plane. I'll then navigate to my object data tab over here, and for the Y location I'm going to add a keyframe. I'll then skip to frame, let's say 15, and that's half a second for me because I'm at 30 FPS. I'll then hit G, Y, hold down shift to drag it in finer increments, and I'm just going to drag it out to, let's say, around about there. I'll then go to my object data tab over here and I'll add a keyframe on the Y location. Now if I skip back to frame 1 and hit play, you can see the text is animated. So we know that the text is fully revealed at frame 15. So I'm in rendered view with my scene world enabled. I want the area light to be active as soon as this text object is revealed. As you can see, the area light is kicking in before the text object is revealed, and it's 100% revealed at frame 15. So we need to ensure that the start value only happens after frame 15. Maybe we could start it on frame 20 or even frame 30. So in your graph editor with your area light selected, I'll navigate to the noise modifier. I'll expand these options over here, and for the restrict frame range, I'm going to set the start value to frame 15 and I want to blend in over 0 frames. So now if I skip back to frame 1 and hit play, you should see the text reveal and then instantly the area light should kick in. Excellent. I think I only want my title sequence to be 4 seconds long, so I'm going to set an end value of, let's say, 120. And that means on all my modifiers over here, I'm going to set an end frame of 120. With my cursor over that value, I'm going to hit Control C to copy. I then expand the stepped, and for the end frame, I hit Control V to paste that value in there. I'm just going to decrease this window over here. I'm going to select my text object, and now we just need to animate these values here. So I'm going to skip back to frame 1. So if the text is fully revealed on frame 15, which is half a second, maybe we should have the text remain stationary for a full 2 seconds before it flickers out, and that would take us to frame 75. So I'm going to move my cursor on my timeline to frame 75, and then in our geometry node window, I'm going to go to this random value node, and with the probability set to 0, I'm going to hit I, and for the seed value set to 0, I'm also going to hit I. I'll then skip to the last frame. I'll slide the probability value to 1, and maybe I'll set the seed to, let's say, 10. I'll then hit I over the seed and I over probability. I'll just hit play, see what we've got. Okay, I can't really see what's happening real time, so I'm just going to go into solid view. I'll just take it to frame 75. I'm going to hit play. I want these to flicker a bit faster. To do that, I'm going to skip to the last frame. I'm going to change the seed value to, let's say, 20. I'll then hit I. Now, I'll skip back to frame 75. I'm going to hit play. There we go. They're flickering a bit faster now. Excellent. Maybe it's a bit too fast, so I'm going to skip to the last frame. And for the seed value, I'm going to set this to 15. I'll then hit I. I'll just take it to frame 75. Hit play. Okay, I'm kind of happy with that. Just to tweak this a bit more, I actually think that we can have the flickering appear a bit sooner. So maybe after 1.5 seconds. So I'll select my random value node. I'll go over to my graph editor. I'm going to hit N to hide the N panel. I'm going to hold down Control, hold down my middle mouse button, and I'm going to drag upwards. I'll then expand the text GN keyframes here. I'll then box select those 2 keyframes. I'm going to hit G, X, and I'm going to drag them over to, let's say, frame 60, which you can see on your timeline here. Alternatively, you can select them in your timeline and hit G to bring them across. So I'm going to drag this to frame 60. I'll then skip back to frame 1. I'm going to hit play. Okay, maybe we can see that in rendered view. Maybe I can see it in viewport shading. I'm just going to hit Control S to save the project. I'll skip to a random frame, maybe frame 48. I'm going to go to my render settings over here. And under your render settings, I'm going to set my noise threshold to 0.025. I'm going to set the max samples to 256. I'll also expand these light options down here. I'm going to disable light tree. I'll also expand light paths. I'm going to scroll down. I'll disable reflective and refractive caustics. I'll just go into solid view. I'm going to hit F12 and render out a test frame. Okay, it's not looking too bad, but I think I'd prefer more of the emission to highlight some of this displaced plane. So I'm going to decrease the displacement on the plane, and hopefully that will increase some of the highlights. So I'm going to hit escape. I'll then select the displacement plane. I'll just enable my overlays over here so we can see that we've got it selected. I'll then change this from the graph editor to the shader editor. And for the displacement scale, I'm going to set this to, let's say, 0.05. I'll then hit F12 just to render out a test frame. We're definitely getting more highlights on the edges over here. Excellent. I'll just hit escape. I'll just navigate to viewport shading. I'll increase this window. I'm going to keep skipping frames until my area light is active. I'll then hit F12 just to render out another test frame. Okay, that's looking quite good. So what I'm looking for here is a balance between highlights and shadows. So you can see we're getting plenty of shadows from this area light. That's excellent. Maybe I can increase the subdivisions for the render to get rid of some of these jagged edges here. It won't matter too much because this is just going to flash, but obviously the higher you go, the better this is going to look. So I'm just going to hit escape. I'll then navigate to my modifier stack over here, and I'll increase the render levels to 6. I'll just hit F12 to render out a preview. Okay, that's looking a lot more crisp. We could even take this further by adding another subdivision surface, but I'm going to keep it at this. I'll just hit escape. Where we decrease the scale on the displacement, this text object won't be poking through as much. So with your displacement object selected, I'm going to go to my back face. I'm going to hit G, Y, hold down shift to snap it in fine increments, and I'll take it to around about there. In fact, maybe I'll skip to frame 1. I'm going to go into solid view. I'll then rotate my viewport to the front view. I'm going to hit G, Y, hold down shift and drag this plane until the text pokes through, and then I'll just drag it forward until it completely disappears. So now if I hit play, you can see that it's poking through. I'll just check that in viewport shading. Okay, I need to drag this object forward a bit more, so I'm going to hit G, Y, hold down shift and drag it forward until the text completely disappears. That's on frame 1. Now if I hit play, it should appear. Excellent. Hit numpad 0 to go into front view. I'm going to select a frame where only the text object is being emitted. I'll just go into viewport shading just to check that. Okay, I'll then go into solid view. I'm going to hit F12 and render out a preview. Okay, that's looking quite good. I'll just close this window. I'm going to go into viewport shading. I'll select a frame where the area light is active. I'll hit Ctrl S, and that should save that as a thumbnail for your Blender file. I'll then navigate to my render settings over here. I'm going to set the noise threshold to 0.01. I'll set the max samples to 1024. I'll then go to my output tab over here. Click this folder and select a folder where you want to save your image sequence, and then click accept. If you're happy with your final result, you can choose the file format of PNG, but if you're working in the TV or movie industry, it's better to select a file format of OpenEXR with a codec of DWAA lossy, and that will decrease your file size whilst increasing your dynamic range for color grading. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to select a file format of PNG. Hit Ctrl S, and then it's simply a case of hitting Ctrl F12, and that will render out your image sequence. Join me on Patreon as a free member, and you'll have access to this file alongside other Blender files from previous tutorials. That's the tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.